Yo guys, Tanmaya for Simple Snippets back with another video tutorial for our playlist Object-Oriented Programming in C++. So in the previous video tutorial, we started off with the Object-Oriented Programming paradigm of C++ programming, and we covered a little bit of theoretical aspect of what Object-Oriented Programming is, and we also saw a basic program. So if you have missed that video, I'll put a card and you can see the card in the top right corner, and go ahead and check that out, because if you don't know what Object-Oriented Programming is, then that video is just for you. So in today's video tutorial, we are going to be discussing constructors and destructors in object-oriented programming. So we'll first go ahead with the theoretical aspect, as in what constructors and destructors are, and then later on see a program. So both theory as well as practical part would be covered, and you'll get a very clear idea. And before we start off, if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because there are more upcoming videos on object-oriented programming as well as many other topics like mathematics, aptitude, other programming subjects, and so on. Okay, so now that you've subscribed to this channel, let's start with today's tutorial. Okay, so let's start off with constructors in C++, and let's go ahead with the theoretical aspect of what exactly a constructor is. And I have written some points out, so let me just read out the first question, that is, what is a constructor? So the answer is also written there. So a constructor is a member function of a class. So we already know what member functions are. Essentially, the functions inside a class are known as member functions, and also you know what exactly a function is, because we've covered that topic as well in this playlist. So a constructor is a member function of a class which initializes objects of a class. Okay, so this constructor is a special function. Okay, and what it does is it initializes the object of a class. So when an object is created in the main function, in the void main function, at that time the data members of that class are initialized, and that job is done by this constructor function. So in C++, constructor is automatically called when object, that is instance of a class, is created. So it is a special member function of the class. So what exactly makes it special? So that's point number 2. How are constructors different from a normal member function? So a constructor is different from normal function in the following ways. So a constructor has the same name as that of a class. So whatever the name of the class, the same name has to be given to the constructor. Now we know all functions have a name, right? So even constructor is a function, so it will have a name, but in this case it has to be compulsorily the same name of the class. And if the class is having a all caps letter, then the constructor name will also have that all caps letter in the name. The next point is constructors don't have return type. So normal functions usually have certain return type. Even if it is not going to return anything, it is void or some integer value, some data type has to be returned. But in constructor's case, there is no return type. The third point is a constructor is automatically called when an object is created. So even though when we don't create a constructor explicitly, the program, when it is compiled or when it runs and when the object is created, at that time the program itself creates a constructor, which is usually known as default constructor, and we'll go through the types of constructors as well. So the last point says the same, that if we do not specify a constructor, C++ compiler generates a default constructor for us, and what it has is it expects no parameters and has an empty body. So that is what a default constructor is. Okay, so now this is just the theoretical aspect. I know you are not still clear because you haven't seen the program, and you'll get a very clear idea when we actually go ahead and go to the practical part and actually code and write that constructor itself. So let's move ahead. So there are 3 different types of constructors in C++. The first one is default constructor, and default constructor is a constructor which does not take any arguments. So we know in functions we can pass arguments or pass in parameters in the opening and closing parentheses, but in default constructor there is no parameter. Then second one, we have parameterized constructor. In this case we have to pass arguments in the constructor. So typically these arguments help initialize an object when it is created. So say for example we have 2 data members in a class, and then we want to initialize those 2 data members. So parameterized constructor can do that job by taking those 2 values as arguments, and you'll understand more when we go ahead and create those constructors. Then the third one is copy constructor. Now this is a special constructor, and a copy constructor is a member function which initializes an object using another object of the same class. So there is a special use case of this copy constructor, and there's a concept as well which is known as deep copy and shallow copy, which comes along with this, and we'll discuss that in the next or further video tutorials, because it's a totally different topic which will take some more time to understand, and I've kept that as a separate tutorial itself. For simplicity purpose, just understand that a copy constructor is a member function which initializes an object using another object. I'll show a use case, but there are more use cases to that, and it is not usually used because copy constructor again is by default called, and it is only essential when we have dynamic memory allocation into picture. And you know what dynamic memory allocation is, and if you don't, then you can check that topic in this playlist itself, and I'll drop a card as well which you can see on the top right corner. Okay, so moving ahead, let's go to what destructors are in C++. So destructors, as the name suggests, is a member function again, which destructs or deletes an object. So it is exactly opposite to what a constructor is. A constructor is used to initialize and construct an object, and destructor does the opposite, which destructs or deletes an object. So when is a destructor called? So a destructor is called when the function ends or the program ends, or a block containing local variables end, or when a delete operator is called. So now again, destructor is also a member function, but it is again a special member function, and the way it is special is because you can see the 2 points that I've given there. Destructors have same name as the class, but it is preceded by a tilde sign so that the destructor and constructor can be distinctly known. So destructors have an extra tilde sign, and you'll see that in the program as well. And lastly, destructor don't take any arguments and don't return anything, not even void. So in this case, they do not take any arguments also. So there is no different types of destructors. There is only one type of destructor in this case. So can there be more than one destructor in a class? So as I mentioned, there can be no different type of destructor. So no, there can be only one destructor in a class with a class name preceded by tilde and no parameters and no return type. So when do we exactly need to write a user-defined destructor? So usually we do not need to write destructor explicitly because the compiler creates a default destructor for us, and that default destructor is pretty decent enough to clear the memory. But if we have dynamically allocated memory or any pointer in class, then that time we have to create a destructor to deallocate that memory. So that's what the last point is stating. So when a class contains a pointer to memory allocated in a class, we should write a destructor to release that memory before the class instance is destroyed. This must be done to avoid memory leaks, which essentially means that memory is allocated but it is not properly deallocated. So this is when we actually need a destructor, and in usual cases we do not need a destructor. So this was all about the theoretical aspect of constructors and destructors in C++, and now that you have a brief idea and what exactly they are, let's actually go ahead and see them in action, and let's go to the practical part wherein we will create some constructors and destructors in a program. Okay, so what you can do is quickly go ahead and open your Dev C++ IDE, and in the previous video tutorial we saw a program wherein we created a class named cars, and we also created some objects of that class, and you can see over here in the main function. So what you can do is you can go ahead and open that program, and if you haven't typed it already, you can quickly pause this video and type it out, or what I'll do is I'll share a file in the description. You can simply download it, but I would recommend that you watch the previous video and go ahead and code this program so that you get a good practice, and that is the best way to actually learn programming. So in the previous video tutorial, what we did is we created a class named cars. We had certain data members. You can see 3 strings, 1 float and 1 double. We created public member functions. These are the 2 member functions, that is void set data and display data. And this was the main function wherein we created one object, we set some data and we displayed that data. So since we already have this program, we'll just continue with the constructor and destructor part in this case. So let's go ahead and create a constructor, and the constructor and destructor has to be in the public part of the class. Since it is a function, just that it is a special function, but it has to be over here. So what I'll do is I'll create a default constructor first. So as I mentioned, it does not have any return type, so you don't have to type in void or something like that. So just the name, and the name has to be same as that of the class. So I'll just copy this. I'll say cars, and since it is a function, it has to have opening and closing round brackets. It has to have a body. But what I'll do in this case is I'll just write down C out, and I'll print default constructor called. So what this does is when the object is created in the main function, this default constructor will be called, and we know that default constructor is always called even if we don't create this. But now we have created this, so the compiler will call this version of that default constructor, and it has to be called explicitly every time when the object is created. So but this time we will get a message that default constructor is called. So let's go ahead and comment this out first, and let's see if this works. I'll save this, I'll go to execute, compile and run, and you can see the message default constructor called over here, which means that our program worked fine and this constructor was called. Now if I create 2 objects, the default constructor should be called 2 times. So let me just save this, again go to execute, compile and run, and there you go, you can see it is printed 2 times default constructor called, which means that 2 objects have been created. So this was the default constructor, but what exactly the default constructor is used for is to initialize these values. So what happens is when the object is created, say for example car1 is created in main function, what is happening is some value is allocated to the members or the data members. So some default value is by default given to these data members by the default constructor, which is auto generated by the compiler. Now this default value is not ideally right or is not usually needed by us. Say for example, let me just show you an example. Now what we'll do is we'll comment this set data part and we'll directly go ahead and print the data that is there in this object. So what we did is in the main function we created car1 object, and before even setting the data, so we have not set any data, we'll directly display data. So we'll see what by default the constructor has allocated. So I'll save this and I'll say compile and run. So as you can see, we have car properties, company name dash, and there is no data, which means the first string, that is company name, this one is kept blank. Again, the company model is blank and type is blank, which means all the string type data members have blank values allocated by the default constructor. But now here you can see car mileage, you can see a weird number, and in the price also you can see a weird number. Now this is by default allocated by the default constructor, which is this one. Since we have not specified any values, it is giving any random value to the float and double type of data members, and for the string type it is giving blank values. So this can be changed in the default constructor, and that is the actual use of default constructor. So what I'll do is I'll just copy this part, I'll paste it over here, and what I'll do is I'll give some hard-coded values. So we know the company name is Toyota. In this case we'll give model name as Altis and the fuel type as petrol. The mileage we'll give as 15.5 and price 15 lakhs. So if I save this and if I say compile and run, in this time you can see the correct values are given. But again there is an issue over here. If I print display data for car 2, again the same constructor is going to be called and the same values are going to be assigned, and these values are hard coded. So every time the same value is going to be displayed. So we don't want that. So in that case what we can do is we can create a parameterized constructor and pass those values over here, and I'll show you how that goes. So what I'll do is I'll just keep the company name constant or hard coded, which means that every object that I create will have company name as Toyota, but the model name, the price, the fuel type will change. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a parameterized constructor. So I'll say cars. Since it is a constructor, it has to have the same name, opening and closing curly braces, and this here we will pass the values. So I'll say string mname, then I'll say string f type, and just copy and paste this part over here. Okay, so what I did is I included 4 parameters. Leaving the company name, I have included all the parameters. So what I'll do is I'll just copy and paste this over here and exclude the company name. So our default constructor is ready over here. You can see, I'll just comment it out. Then we have a parameterized constructor, which is taking 4 arguments, that is leaving the company name, all the other arguments, and they are assigning to the data members. So now you can see I have created car1, and in this case the default constructor is called. But for car2, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open and close round brackets over here, and here I'll pass those values, and those values are the model name. So in this case I'll say Fortuner, which is the model name. Then the fuel type is going to be diesel. Mileage is going to be 10 km per liter, and the price is going to be 35 lakhs. So what exactly happened is, while creating the objects, the first one did not have any opening and closing round brackets, which means that the default constructor is called, and this is how you call the parameterized constructor. You create the object, and along with that you open and close the round brackets and pass the equal number of arguments according to the prototype which you have created in the parameterized constructor. So you have 2 strings, so that's why I passed 2 strings. Then this is going to be taken as float value and this is going to be taken as double value. Okay, one mistake that I'm doing is this does not have to be in double quotes, since it is a float value and this is a double value. Only the string values are supposed to be in double quotes. So now let's go ahead and try to run this, and let's see what the value is for car1 and what the value is for car2. I'll just add one more endl over here so that we can have a clear distinction between the two. So let me just save this, go to execute, compile and run. Okay, I have made a typing error. You can see that I have added string as caps, so I just have to do small caps over here. Save this, go to execute, compile and run. So there you go with the output, and you can see for the car1 we have company name as Toyota. The company model, since I have not set anything, the default constructor is called, but in default constructor I'm not setting anything, so that is why it is blank blank. Then the car mileage is 0 and price is set to some random number, and the car mileage is 0 because every time the constructor is called it will set any random number, so it can be any number over here. Now for the second car, you can see that we did not pass the company name. So leaving that, everything is correct over here. It is coming from the parameterized constructor. So what we can do is we can even pass the company name over here. So I'll say Toyota and just add one more argument over here. In the parameterized constructor. So I'll just go ahead and paste it over here, give a comma, copy this and paste it over here. So what I'll do is I set the data for car 1 using the set data function, but for car 2 I'm setting the data using the parameterized constructor. So there are two ways to set data, and usually the constructor is used to set data. So let's again execute this. So there you go. For the first case we have Toyota Altis petrol 15.5 and 15,000. This was set by this function set data. And for the car 2 we have car company name Toyota Fortuner, diesel, mileage is 10 km per liter and car price is 35 lakhs, which is set by this parameterized constructor. So now these two are very clear to you. So let's go ahead and create one copy constructor. So again, same name as the class name. So it's cars, opening and closing curly braces for the function body. Now inside the copy constructor, what we have to do is we have to pass an object of the same class. But the way we pass this is cars and obj. Now this and means the address is passed. So what is happening is, let me just copy and paste it over here first. So this object is of the same data type as cars, and the object that we are going to create using this object is also going to be the same. So essentially what we are doing is we are creating an object of cars using another object of the same data type, that is cars. So this company name is going to be for the object that is being created, and this obj dot company name is going to be the object that is going to be used, or the object whose values are going to be used. Values, by values I mean the data members are going to be used to create the new object. Again we have obj dot model name, then we have obj dot fuel type, then we have obj dot mileage, and lastly we have obj dot price. So this is the syntax when we are going to create a copy constructor. We have to pass the object of the same data type, so that is why cars, but in this case we have to pass with the AND, which is the address operator. So what I'll do is I'll just print individual messages, copy constructor. So this would paste default constructor called, this would paste parameterized constructor called, and this would paste copy constructor called. So let's just save this. Now in the main function we have the first object cars1. So here, since there is no opening and closing round brackets, you know that the default constructor is going to be called. So the first message is going to be printed, which is over here, default constructor called, and there's nothing else inside the body, so only this message is going to be called. For the second object, you know, the parameterized constructor is getting called because you can see that we have passed 5 different values. So here's the parameterized constructor. So the message is also going to be printed. Then what we are doing is we are setting the data of car1 using the set data function. Then we are printing car1 data and we are printing car2 data. What I'll do is I'll create one more object of same data type, cars car3. But in this case what I'm going to do is, let me just create it over here at the end. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create car3 using the object car1. Now this means that we are going to copy data from car1 to car3. So this is the place where copy constructor is called. Now the car1 is going to be passed as an object in this place, and car3 data members are going to be on the LHS side. So the company name, model name over here, this and this is for car3, and this object.company name, object.model name is for car1. So that is how the assignment happens from right to left. So okay, let's go ahead and compile this and let's see how this goes. So there you go, the first default constructor was called, you can see on the line 1 for car1. Then you can see parameterized constructor was called, which means at this place. Then we set the data. So here we haven't printed any message, but the data for car1 is set at this line. Then we displayed the data for car 1. You can see the car properties over here. Then we have displayed the data for car 2, which is over here. And here the copy constructor is called. You can see the message copy constructor called. However, we did not print the data for car 3. So what we will do is, let's go ahead and print that data. So car 3 dot display data. So if car 3 data members are equal to car 1 data members, we can say that the copy constructor was successfully called. So let's save this, go to execute, compile and run. So this is car 1 and this is car 3. Let's compare the data. You can see car 1 company name Toyota, here also Toyota, Altis, petrol 15.5 and 15 lakhs, which is same as the car 3. So this means that the copy constructor functionality was successfully achieved. And you can also see that the message is printed copy constructor called. Okay, so these were the 3 different variations of constructors. Now let's go ahead and create one destructor, since we only have one type of destructor, and in this case we are not having any dynamic memory or any pointers, so we actually do not need to implement any destructor. But just for the sake of understanding, what we'll do is we'll create a destructor. So the way we create a destructor is we have to start off with the tilde sign and then again the same class name. So cars, opening and closing round bracket, since it is a function, and an empty body. But inside the empty body, what I'll do is I'll just print destructor called. So this destructor is going to be called when the object is going to go out of scope or the program is going to exit. So let's try to run this and let's see if this destructor called method is called, and we can see that message. Okay. So as you can see, the program ended over here. So that is the reason why we are getting destructor called. We got it 3 times. And you must be wondering why we get the message 3 times. So let me just first add an escape sequence and print. Let's try to compile and run it again. Okay, so the program got over at this point over here, car3.display data. So the third car displayed the data and the program was completed. So after that, the 3 objects went out of scope and the destructor was called for all the 3 objects. So that is the reason why it printed destructor called for 3 times. So this is how the destructor works, and we have just printed a simple message. But if you have a pointer or dynamic memory allocation, the deallocation should happen in the destructor. So this is a destructor. So there you go, we have the destructor over here. Then we have the 3 constructors. So this is the copy constructor, the parameterized constructor and default constructor. So this was the practical aspect of constructors and destructors, and you have seen a practical implementation, and you also know what constructors and destructors do, as well as we've gone through the theoretical aspect. So that's it for this video, guys, and I hope you understood the concept of constructors and destructors in C++, object-oriented programming, and what is the functionality of constructors, why do we need them, what is the functionality of destructors, why do we need them, the types of constructors, and the practical implementation program. So if you have any comments or queries, you can always put them in the comment section, and if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and make sure you subscribe to this channel so that you get notified when I upload the further tutorials on object-oriented programming and other topics as well. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video tutorial. Peace.